Hello, everybody. It's This Little Verse, and today I'm going to be wrapping up what I read back in June. And the title of today's video is Poetry and Peculiarity because the only theme sort of going in June was that I was trying to read more poetry collections, and everything else was kind of like a mixed bag. And there was one book I read that was just like very different for me. And so that's why today's video has the title that it does. So, I'm going to start off with the poetry collections. I know we had a good discussion going last week about poetry collections people had enjoyed, and oh, oops. So hopefully people have read some of these collections and they want to talk about them today. So first up is Beastgirl and Other Origin Myths by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a poetry collection that had been on my radar for a little bit. Like, I really like the cover. You can see it has like this like paper mache looking effect. Like, it looks like it was like cut and pressed paper to like make this cover, and I think it's just very beautiful. And also, I'd read Elizabeth Acevedo's young adult novels. I had read With the Fire on High, and I'd read The Poet X. And I knew that she was a poet, and that had really informed her writing, especially in The Poet X. And so I wanted to actually read some of her poetry, so I picked this collection up. And the poetry is good. It's fine, but like most of it, but it wasn't like a collection that really like stuck with me. Most of the poems in Beastgirl and Other Origin Myths are about kind of like everyday stuff. Like, what was trying to think of some of the topics of the poems. When I say everyday stuff, I mean like things like in daily life type stuff. And I tend to like poems that are either like very abstract and like weird, or like poems about like, I don't know, worlds that aren't ours, like speculative poetry type stuff. So this just wasn't a collection that was really like holding my attention. In terms of recurring topics, misogyny comes up a lot in these poems, and talking about like Dominican history from different angles. So there's like poems about dealing with catcalling, poems about like growing up, and like being expected to take on certain roles as a daughter. Hi, William. I don't know if I'd say it's magical realism. Like, oh, in terms of the poems I like, yeah, I would probably read those types of poems. I think my favorite poems from this collection were La Ciguapa and For the Poet Who Told Me Rats Aren't Noble Enough Creatures for a Poem. La Ciguapa was one of the more fantastical poems. It was about this folkloric woman, La Ciguapa, who like lures men to their deaths. And I really like the turns of phrase in there. It was like short and brutal. And it's funny how I said I like poems about kind of like mundane like life aren't really my thing, because my other favorite poem was about just rats on the subway. And I don't know why that one stuck with me. I think it was because it was looking at something that I don't know, I wouldn't think to write a poem about. So that was one I also really enjoyed. Then the other poetry collection that I read was Spill, Scenes of Black Feminist Fugitivity by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. And this is the cover for that one. So the premise for this book is that there are, I think the collection is Spill, if I remember correctly. No, sorry, that's a lie. This book is like an homage to Hortense Spiller, who is, if I remember correctly, a Black feminist theorist. And basically the title for every poem in the collection is a spin on like a different line from this one essay that Spillers had written. And I had not read the essay in question. And just in general, I think the book was like way over my head. 1 second, I have to sneeze. Okay, sorry, I'm back. But basically, the collection kind of went over my head. Like, I really was having trouble following it, because it is, I think this is like poetry for people who really like poetry. Like, I'm kind of new to it, So I didn't really have a whole lot of takeaways from when I read it. Um, I thought this was a neat idea though, like an interesting way to pay homage to someone. And another interesting thing was that the titles aren't like right on top of the poem like they normally would be. It's like you read the poem and then there's like a note for a footnote, and you have to go to the back of the book and read the title there. So like you kind of read the piece not really having an idea of like what you're gonna expect going into it. So that was interesting. Um, I did generally like the poems. Um, I don't know if they were using any like traditional structure that like I should have recognized, but I felt like every poem had like a sense of rhythm to it. They had like some sort of rhyme scheme, and so they were like fun to read aloud and fun to read in general. And I think the poems do follow like a basic like storyline. It's about this woman who's in an unfulfilling marriage and she's like debating if she should leave, and then each poem is like a different part of the story. So there's like the poems in the beginning are when she's just kind of like realizing that she's dissatisfied. There's poems as you kind of realize why she's not happy with her marriage. There's some poems from her husband's perspective. There are poems about like other people's perspectives about like what they think about her and her marriage. Um, and so like it was a very interesting collection and it was like fun to read, but it was also not one that like I finished and felt like I had a lot to say about it because I think I probably missed a lot of the intricacies. Hey T, hey Erin. Sneezing is so inconvenient. Yeah, I don't want to be making weird faces on camera. So those were the two poetry collections. And then this month I also read, sorry, not this month, this is for June. The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This was for the Broken Earth read along. And obviously I really enjoyed it because I read the series and was like, I want to read it again and I want to host a read along for it. So in terms of like what I thought about it this time around as opposed to the first time around, it was interesting reading it. Now having like read most of N.K. Jemisin's like published work and like already knowing where things were going, like the book is very intricate. Like the prologue is great. Like I think the first time around it seems like kind of vague and like grandiose for no reason, but like on a reread, I'm like, wow, not a single line was wasted. Like everything that was in that prologue was a foreshadow for something down the road. It's told from the perspective of three people. There's a little girl, Demaya, there's a woman, Essen, there's a woman, Cyanite. And I'm not really going to give the synopsis for this because I've just been talking about it on my channel for so long with the read along. But yeah, I did hold up on reread. And I'm like realizing that I think Jemisin's also very good at like explaining science concepts. Like I read this book and I was like, I'd be very interested if she were to like compile her research and like make a book about like geology or like gems or something like that. I think that would be cool. Is there anything else I wanted to say about this book? Let me think. I think I also really like how I think Jemisin's really good at like making recognizable characters. Like all these characters are very distinct and they have lives that just feel like very full. Like I feel like you can see how people's viewpoints have changed and morphed over time. And like every character is just very distinct. Like, you know, I'm never like confused like when I'm reading a chapter, like whose point of view it's from, because everyone's point of view feels like their own person. And also like I just remember so many of the characters' names, like even some of the minor characters, because it feels like everyone just has like such a strong, memorable personality. So I really like this fantasy series, would recommend. Is there anything else I would like to say about it? The book has a map and a glossary, and the glossary makes it a little, oh, and an appendix about each like season or terms that come up. So that makes it a little easier on the first go around if you're not sure what's going on. The map looks nice, but like a lot of the places that you go to in the story aren't necessarily on the map. I think the map is more so to like help you keep track of the regions because like the regions are like very important to these people and they're talking about like categories and appearances. So like I guess that's helpful, but it doesn't really help you like when they're like, oh, I'm gonna go to this place because some of those places aren't on the map. Like I remember I forget what it was, but like that little city that Demai is from like isn't on here. I think the main like cities that are called out are like Yemeni is the capital and some of the islands. I guess it's also cool because you can see like the plates that the stillness is located on. So you can like know where all the hot spots are and like where are the good places for orogeny. So that's cool. Aaron says, I don't think I'm smart enough to read N.K. Jemisin. I think you could do it, honestly. I think it wasn't until reread, like when I was trying to summarize it for people, that I realized like how complicated the world was because I think it's something that's like easy to get immersed in. Like, I just think it is. Like I think a lot of the core, like the new words, I think she's gonna repeat them enough times in enough different like scenarios where you kind of get a feel for, you know, what they mean to the characters in the world and like how our world compares to theirs. And also I think the way that she writes is like pretty easy to read. Like I know some people didn't like the perspective because I think it's written in second person, so it's like narrating to you as if you're like a person in the story. But I think that kind of like puts you in the perspective of like some of the characters in the book. And I think the writing for the most part like is pretty easy to get through. Like I'm reading like another fantasy that's probably about as complicated as this one, but it's also a lot slower and it's a lot more just like the writing, it kind of is that like slower, like longer sentences, bigger words type thing. And I think Jemisin has like words that she likes to use that you'll see come up a couple times, and like she has like a nice writing style, but I don't think it's too overwhelming for noobs if you want to give it a try. I mean, also if you're intimidated about like all the world building that goes on and like a fantasy set in a completely different world, you could also try The City We Became because most of that takes place in New York. So by and large, it's going to be stuff that is like rooted in our world and like a little bit more familiar. He says, I'm a sci-fi newbie and love the 5th season. To me, at its heart, it's a family saga. I would agree with that. I think it is very much a family saga. It's about the relationships between mothers and daughters, between I guess lovers, parents. It's like a very complicated story. I think it is really very much about people's relationships to each other. So I also read Bacchanal. Wait, no, that's not how I say it. Bacchanal by Veronica Henry. This was an advanced reader's copy that I got, and so I'm going to be doing a full review at some point. But for now, I just kind of wanted to talk about it very vaguely. So basically, this is set in like 1920s. It starts off in Louisiana, but they kind of go to different states in the South. It's about this girl, Eliza Woods, who's recently been orphaned. Her parents are dead or missing, and she doesn't know where her sister was taken to, but she's basically trying to get out of this small town in Louisiana where she is and try and find her sister. And she has this ability to talk to animals, but unfortunately, it's very erratic. Sometimes she'll like accidentally kill the animals that she's trying to communicate with, and it doesn't always work when she wants it to. But one day she thinks that like she's like set to go to see her sister when this carnival called Bacchanal runs through, and they're looking for new acts. And she says that she can talk to animals, so she'd be a good addition, and she joins this carnival. But the carnival's really weird. Like, none of the carnies who are part of it are allowed to have kids, like, on the premise of the carnival. Um, People will like go missing on rides and stuff like that. And so she's also kind of nosy, and so she's trying to figure out what's going on with this carnival. And so it's about her trying to get reunited with her sister and just try and survive this demonic carnival. So, um, in terms of like what I liked about it, the spooky parts were my favorite. Like I really liked the atmosphere when they're like in the carnival and like people are being disappeared, or it's talking about like people's decisions on like why they decide to show up at the carnival. I think for me it was like heart-wrenching in some ways because it's like um the risk is so big going to this carnival, right? Like people are dying and stuff or disappearing, and the things that people are like the things that tempt people to enter the carnival are like so small, partially because some of them are kids, partially because it's the Great Depression and so a lot of people are strapped for cash. But like, there's one kid who goes because he just wants a red balloon. There's someone who goes because they just want a new teddy bear, or someone who just like misses laughing and feeling happy. So they go to this carnival and they find the opposite of laughter and happiness. I initially thought it was going to be like an adult horror. I'm not entirely sure what it's being marketed as. I know I was saying it was an adult horror, but like I felt like around the 2/3 mark, some of the spooky stuff goes away, and it felt a little bit more like a young adult historical fantasy to me. I don't know what the technical like age is, like if I were to look it up on the website. So Eliza's an interesting protagonist, and there are a lot of interesting side characters at this carnival. Like there are strongmen, there's like a hyena werewolf who works there. There's like a carnivorous dwarf who's pretty creepy. Um, and I think that's all I'll say about that for now, because I'm still working on the full length review. And while I was reading it, I felt like I was making a lot of connections to things I'd read in other places. Like I'm not super familiar with this time period or this location. I mean, they go to a couple different locations. I think they're in like Louisiana, they're in like Texas. Trying to think of some of the other states, but they don't get too far north. But also, there is a member of the carnival who's from New York, and so he has a connection to Stephanie St. Clair, who was sort of like a famous Black female gangster who I think was operating out of, I think she was out of Harlem, and she like had a business doing like illegal like gambling on the side. And I think she kind of has like a notoriety among people who like history stuff because she's mentioned, I think, in the afterword. There's like a little write up on like her life and like the mystery around her. And I was interested because I had first learned about this person through a short story, I Make People Do Bad Things by Cheshire Burke, which I really, really liked. And so it was interesting to see like another take on this person and the role that she plays in this world. It was also interesting because I had like finished this shortly after I read A Song Below Water, is that there are Boloko in both novels. So in A Song Below Water, there's kind of more like a liberty taken with them, from what I understand of the original myth. And the loco is like a very small humanoid looking person, but they have like green grassy beards from what I remember, and they eat people, and they either like sing or have like a magical bell that will like lure people to them. And in A Song Below Water, a lot of the loco myth is just myth, like they're pretty similar to regular people. And in this one, it's kind of more of a literal interpretation of the folklore from what I've seen. So it's just interesting seeing those back to back. Another thing that I had read about, not as recently, but a few of the side characters in here are the Dahomey women warriors. There's like in this book, and I don't know if it's historically true or not, the warriors had been like pretty much killed off in a raid or like rendered like not useful to the kingdom anymore. And so that's how the carnival got two of them to work for them. But I had first been introduced to them through a nonfiction memoir, Barracoon, by Zora Neale Hurston, where she was interviewing Cujo Lewis, who I think was like one of the last like person who had been like enslaved and like but had been like alive. I'm really having trouble remembering how to say it. He was like the last person, like the last enslaved African, I guess, in the United States who had like memories of his time like living. I'm trying to remember if they said where he was from, but it was somewhere like I think within the Kingdom of Dahomey. And I say one of the last because I feel like there have been a couple other people like who they've since found out who are also in similar circumstances, but that's why it was kind of like a big deal memoir. And that mentioned the women warriors. In that memoir, the person who's Hurston's interviewing mentions them because they were part of the raid that led to him being enslaved. And here they are sort of performing a similar role as they would in the real world. They're like the muscle for the carnival. They kind of keep out rowdy trespassers. They make some of the problems with law enforcement go away. So those are all items of interest to me in this book. And last up, this was the real reason why I called it Poetry and Peculiarity, was this nonfiction book, In Intimate Detail, How to Choose, Wear, and Love Lingerie by Cora Harrington. So this was one I bought like years ago, kind of on a whim, because I had like been following Cora Harrington on Twitter. She is a lingerie blogger, so she talks about like, and her focus is more on like retro and like luxury brands. And she's also, I think, a fashion historian. And so she has a lot of interesting things to share about like history and like also like what the industry is doing and why. So I think that's why I picked this up. Pull out my notes on this one. So generally her blog focuses on like inclusivity and like very like feminine lingerie, like I was saying. And that carries over here. She does talk about searching for I think specifically like bras and underwear, like if you recently had like a surgery, if you're a breastfeeding mother, if you are of like a size that most stores might not just carry on hand. And it was interesting because I think she defines lingerie and like it's a lot more expansive than I originally thought it was. Like this book talks about bras, shapewear, underwear, hosiery, and loungewear. So like I think technically like nice robes also counts as lingerie, which was not something that I knew. And I think for me, it was like interesting because it's not the topic I know a whole lot about, but I think for me, the things that like stick out in my mind the most were like the history facts, because she gives some of the backstory on like why certain items of clothing exist, and like why certain fashions are popular now. And I thought that was very interesting. Like I feel like it shouldn't have blown my mind this much, but like basically how much like World War II influenced lingerie in the US was like a big like moment for me. And I feel like it should have been way more intuitive for me to wrap my head around it than it was. Like I think that I posted some like tidbit from here that like in the US and like during World War II, it was like women just did not walk around with bare legs. It just was not a thing that you did. But they were having a nylon shortage. Like I think they were using the nylon for like parachutes or some other type of military gear. And so as part of like I don't know what you call it, like the war effort, they were like not trying to like demoralize people by being like you can't wear stockings anymore, but like also we need the nylon, so you kind of can't wear stockings anymore. They were like encouraging people to like paint their legs with like what was it? It said it was like gravy or like dyes or like berry juice or things like that. And it was just wild to me that people were like painting on these stockings and like I think that they mentioned that people like even like paint on the seams of the stockings too. Um, I keep meaning to ask my grandma about that, if that was a thing that actually happened, if she was alive at that time. I have to double check which one is, or which one was, I should say. That was interesting. Um, General, pretty comprehensive guide. Does not cover like leather or fetish wear if that's the thing that you were interested in. Or like traditionally masculine clothing that might fall under the lingerie umbrella, because I don't think that's her focus on her blog, and this book is kind of like a lot of the things that her blog condensed into book form. Um, so yeah, that was that. And I think that's everything that I read in June. I'll stick around for like 2 minutes or so if people want to chat, but that was really all I wanted to say today. Not up to a whole lot. I don't think June was like a terrible reading month for me. Like I remember May was kind of like a slog for me to read anything. I think in June it was getting a little bit better, but I think I was still having trouble finding things that held my attention. Honest, Honestly, I feel like my reading towards the beginning of the year was great, and then ever since then it's just been kind of like ebbing and flowing. Like it hasn't really been like consistently good. Okay, so I don't see anyone in the comments, and it looks like most people have left the live. So I'm going to take this opportunity to say goodbye. Thanks for joining me. Take care and have a good rest of your night. See you around.